Yeah, okay, cool. Hello, my name is Mathilde Mujanayi, or at least Mathilde Kabuka Mujanayi. And this is welcome to my artist talk. Oh, girl. Anywho, about me. I was born in 2002 in Buji-Mayi, Democratic Republic of Congo. I'm Congolese American. I'm a photo-based interdisciplinary artist. Just the idea around not restricting myself to like paper and going into other medias, but also using photo as like foundation for it. I do think that a lot of my works are like very based in like narrative, or at least like storytelling for sure. And so I guess that's a small introduction. And that's also me. I don't know what age I was, but yeah, let's put it on since I don't know. Anywho's, why photo, you might ask. When I came to the United States, I came here when I was 9. I couldn't speak a lick of English actually. And so I was going through like all these schools, and while I was learning how to speak English, like my English was heavy accented. And so I didn't have like as many friends, or at least I wasn't able to communicate what I wanted to say like most of the times. And so there was one time in 8th grade, I was told to go into yearbook club. An art teacher gave me a camera and she told me to go around and photograph everyone. That's when my relationship with photography started. Not only did it give me a little, like juice to be like, hey, you want a photo? But also I realized that people like being photographed and they themselves would get curious about a camera. And so that created that dynamic. That also kind of transferred into high school. Um, High school, it like kind of became foundation for how my relationship to photography is now, where um as far as like being an immigrant and coming into like America, I think my American family kind of already just assumed that I knew all the dynamics that come into like, racism and all of these things, but I kind of didn't. I knew of it, but I also just didn't have the vocabulary or being able to like paraphrase what experience I was having, whether it related to racism or not. And so what ended up happening is I felt so isolated in like a bunch of these PWIs, and it would just be like I'd find myself in racist dynamics with my like white counterparts, but I wouldn't be able to verbalize it. Like it was so difficult because I didn't have, once again, the language or the vocabulary. And so somehow photography made its way into like became the language. And so now I think of photography as almost like journal entries for the way, um, for myself, not only to be understood, to understand myself, but also almost like an olive branch to have people like be able to understand me a little bit better. And so I do make identity based works. I feel like almost all the works that I make are based on, well, not even almost, but like most works, all the works that I make are based on myself, to like one experience or another. And so they just essentially kind of start breaking down like whatever identities and trying to talk about the experiences that I have within said like intersections and things along those lines. I call them American-isms. Like I try to go through imperial, colonial, and try to um, kind of break it down or things along those lines. Um, I guess I first want to start off with like some tintypes, and by some I mean like two. But with this particular ones, I wanted to create. I did a research like I was introduced to tintypes what junior year, and I wanted to see like if there were other images of Black people on tintypes because most of the ones that we saw were just like white folk. And well, what came was like a dark history, and like the most famous tintype of a Black person is one of an enslaved man from actually Congo. He was called here Peter, and there were like scars of whip scars on his back, and like I feel like everyone to some degree has seen that image or not. And so I wanted to create through tintypes. I want to create this like middle space or middle ground where like Black people are photographed, but almost like honored and like become not necessarily these mythical creatures, but almost like sacred creatures, sacred people, where like our rituals or our um, customs are honored and our lives exist, things along those lines. And I think that started driving kind of all the tintypes I make, and but I'm only giving you two for this one. Um, but I find myself being attracted to like the form a lot, or at least like the body. A lot of my images, one way or another, could you're gonna see a lot of nudity somehow or something. But I don't necessarily think of nudity as like this gigantic thing. I think once I took off the clothes, it was just over. It was just like one of those things where it was like almost every image is like, oh, maybe this just can be off for real. But also simultaneously, I think there's, well, of course, there's vulnerability that comes with being naked and being able to present yourself as such. And I think one thing about like my work is because I am a bigger woman. I think with the fat body, the consensus is to hide it and always kind of like um, ensure that you're not seen as fat. Where I don't know, and like the showcasing of it, I'm just like, I don't know, fatness exists and there's nothing to hide. It can already be seen, or at least it's there. So I don't know. It's kind of like my way of trying to go against that. But I don't think of it as that anymore. It's just like my presentation. But with this series, I again one of the dynamics I wanted to talk about where I found myself like again as a big woman, being put in caretaking roles within like dynamics with my white counterparts, actually my non-black counterparts, and so it would just be one of these like things where I'd find myself overextending and almost kind of and like when there's no resuscitation not resuscitation but when there's no like equal you give into somebody and they pour into you, it becomes suffocating almost, and that's what like yes the series became for me. I do think in my work there's a lot of symbolism. That's the whole narrative thing where I don't think I can make an image unless commissioned, where I don't have anything as part of it, um, or at least like some kind of thing that hints at something else. Because for me, there's always a bigger story to understand, or at least there's always something to understand. And so, one way or another, you're gonna find something coming in there, trying to say something or anything at all, whether that's the touch, the positioning, or things along those lines. With this goes now into like my being an immigrant. A focus of my work that I've been like focusing in for the past like 2 years has literally been about how to unassimilate. So to have an Congolese identity, or at least to have this American identity that has sort of like been the more dominant identity in comparison to my indigenous one, has left me a little feeling too weird. There was just like a specific time where I wasn't even able to talk to my family back in Congo, and I've just recently started speaking to them again. And so I took a workshop, and they were like, "Oh, bring all the archives." I was asking my family for archives, but we had just limited about like 7 images or something along those lines. And it was because after we came here, our house back in Congo burned down. And so they only had limited images of me as a toddler or as a kid. I don't have any baby pictures outside of the one that you saw at the beginning. And so as I was like going to through these works of like, okay, how do I get back to Congo? How do I get back to who I, or at least my full identity or my indigenous identity? How do I get back to like my mother and all of those like types of questions? I wanted to encapsulate that literally into an idea. In Congo, or at least in a lot of African countries, in the street markets, there's always going to be this person with like water bags for you to drink because it's so hot and it's going to be so fresh, it's going to be so cold, and usually like about $1 or two. And so I wanted to create an idea around that where these works are transparent film, archival images on transparent film, water mixed in with bleach, and it's sealed into the water bag. And I wanted to essentially take the idea of where I'm trying to keep all these memories and I'm trying to like remember them and keep them to myself, or at least not even keep them to myself, but keep them from fading. But even in my efforts, they still like fade anyway. And so this is what came of that. I'm trying to redo it once again so that I can document it better. But yeah. Oh, this was the video, but I don't know if I have the time to show it. It's like 58 seconds long, but I don't know. This can be shared with you guys and you guys can go back and watch it. Oh, never mind. She wants to show anyway.
qu'on s'est parlé de vraiment ashamed and everything. Ashamed to have forgotten so much. Pour la même raison que je pourrais vous parler. Qu'est-ce qui va se passer si vous ne me connaissez pas? Si je ne suis pas le même Mathieu que tu as eu. Depuis quand même que Mama Holo, if you don't know. I can make comments.
Okay, and so ideas around that. And what's it called? What I've the practice that I'm now in is like I'm taking three ideas around and assimilating, like three practices, not even three practices, but essentially I'm creating rituals of my for myself to literally get back to my indigenous identity, whether that's talking to my mother in Congo or at least trying to start thinking in French for like every English word I have or things along those lines, small little practices that kind of get back to whatever identity I left behind. And some of the ideas that have been being made when it comes to this practice though have been about unburying memories and then restaging them. So like whatever I can remember, when I can remember them, I'll write it down and then I'll restage it in the studio. So this was a restaged memory. I remember whenever after it rained, we'd go to my mother and I would go to the well, grab some water in order to go back home with. And I remember the drippings that would occur, like whenever we would just walk, because we'd be having conversations, and it would be. I wanted to emphasize that within this image, but also, I mean, we weren't half naked; we had shirts on. But I think for me, again, there's a specific type of vulnerability that's created when um, there's nakedness in the image. Um, what's it called? This image was created as a diptych to this one. These big, like this image is called "Sodas Came in Glass Bottles" where I'm from, where and Gongo like I remember just the sodas literally came in glass bottles, and so I wanted to kind of photograph an image that looked like that. But then I thought that how frustrating this process has been for me, remembering and trying to. It's almost been like so much mourning and I've almost like with every memory I get closer to supposed Congo, it hurts even more because I now acknowledge that, dang, I'm so far from where I used to be, or things along those lines. And so it's been a painful thing. So I wanted to kind of take that idea and maybe put it in this form. And so where the Coke bottle now becomes a representation of Congo for me, or at least memories that I've been trying to find, touching them or at least initiating contact has been hurtful. And then this one is called "To My Mother's with Flowers in Her," to my mother who looks at me with flowers in her eyes. It was made as an acknowledgement of how, where the Congo that I remember is dated. So is my mother's idea of me. For every conversation that we have with one another, she still looks at me as this person that, she raised, but I might not be the same person anymore. And so, rose colored glasses, things along those lines. Um, and then we have, I guess this is one of my most favorite like pieces, and you've probably most recognizable one. I feel like most people have seen this one. But I guess this was like a documentation of like the mourning that was occurring when I was again trying to unbury these memories and trying to talk to my family in Congo and things along those lines. I wanted to create a mourning image where I essentially talked about how um, not even overpowering American like culture was. Almost like I kind of had no choice but to assimilate. And so the idea of like putting the flag was actually photoshopped to be bigger. I wanted it to get a little bigger than my body for sure. It was smaller when it was being photographed. Um, but I also wanted to put it upside down because an upside down American flag means that the place or the the establishment that it's part of is in crisis when like a flag is flipped in that manner. But also you have the flowers at the bottom. And even the dirty socks, I wanted to kind of like be, I felt like it was a reach, but I wanted the idea around like a travel journey, like to have walked all this way and it's dirtied. And so to get to here or to there. And so, yeah, that's where I'm at. And that's the end. Do I stop sharing or something? Hello. Sorry, I can't hear you. Oh, thank you. I don't know how to stop sharing. Oh,
That was awesome. A round of applause. Nice job.
thank you,
Does
thank
anyone
you.
have any questions? Feel free to unmute and ask.
Thank you for sharing. That was so special.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a question. Oh, sorry, my phone. Uh, looking through your work, there's such a strong voice to the topics that you're tackling. My question is like, where do you see yourself going in the next year? Just like thinking in a small time frame. Do you see yourself utilizing the same like visual language, or are you gravitating towards more experimental approaches? Just
That's a
wondering.
good question. I feel like I'm currently at a standstill a little bit, or at least like I think I had a breakthrough with the word unassimilate when I found it, and I was like, oh yeah, that's literally been the whole process. I'm literally just trying to go back home almost, or at least like gather what I can of home and keep that as maybe the dominant culture, or at least an even spacing between like the American and the Congolese. But what's happening right now is I'm literally trying to gather funds so that I can make this project. The amount of between the props, I looked into like gathering props from, if we're talking about restaging memories, I've looked into gathering props from Congo and like having them shipped over, but that shit is expensive. Okay, what's it called? So it's been one of those things where like I want to make these works, but not only do I not have the space to do it nor the money to do it, but also like what's it called, time when it comes to like job and things along those lines. But in a year I've continued. There's so many ideas that I've written down about like even the process of assimilation. I was thinking of doing this small like video clip of um, trying to say the ABCs in French and English and seeing how like one, because I can't fully say the ABCs in French without doubting my pronunciation of specific like letters where it almost kind of like automatically switches into English. And so being able to see that on video, or at least like see that um, what's it called, being compared or at least put on top of one another, layered on top of one another, and being able to see that struggle. There's ideas here, and there's a plan to make them. If I can find myself with a little cash and a little good job to sponsor them, it's over for sure. But yeah, no, I definitely also am moving towards. I want this to almost accumulate into like a book, but also move a big movie, like a big moving image. So just a bunch, the video that you all saw earlier, I wanted to be in continuation with, gathered around with other videos too, and almost make it into like a letter for my mother for her to see, or yeah.
Hi.
Thank you.
Oh, oh my God. Hi, Matilda. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think it's my first time like being formally introduced to your work, other than just passing by and say hi. So it was so special to me. And it like the fact that you mentioned like you're restaging your memory was really like strong concept. And then that was like a thread for me to understand like how your practice is going and flowing. So, and I had a question about like staging in like, do you also consider to take off like series of photos like outside or like on site and instead of like doing a studio like restaging or yeah, just wondering about it.
That's a good question because I was really pondering over that one too. I thought, what's it called? I was like originally I think I was gonna go all over the place and have the idea of like American land being the the weird thing that changes, I don't know, not even changes, but like the thing that's also like offset the memory itself. They're being made here, but there's no um Congolese resources that are able to be comment est-ce que je peux dire ça? It was thought of, and I was thinking about it, and I was like contemplating like, okay, how, like, where are spaces that I could like create these images and that could also seem like I'm I'm restaging them rather than, you know, um, just making an image. And I was originally thinking of like historical places that you could identify as like American places for sure. The only problem with like restaging them on the outside almost is like, for me, to a certain degree, Congo and like American establishments are almost, not even almost the same, but like let's say between roads and streets and things along those lines, they're almost the same for me. And so to have this artificial space that could like really let you know that it's like fabricated rather than um this natural space that could really almost kind of put you back into that space was kind of important for me. I wanted the idea around like, no, this is fabricated. Like she staged it. Like she put it all together in order to recreate this. If that answers the question.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
I have a question, and also kind of like a thing that I've super deeply appreciated about your work is the like work you do to kind of like find your own history and like sort of like collect that knowledge and experience like from just memories that you like feel sensations about to um like the actual like photographs that you kind of preserve by like making copies of and then turning them into art pieces. And I'm kind of wondering like what sort of goes through your head as you're taking these like memories and then converting them into like pieces of art. Like is there like an intentional sort of like archivist sort of perspective coming into it versus like are you mostly doing this to tell a story? I don't know if that question made sense, but I just want to know what's in your head.
And what's it called? So that they may never fade again is literally the answer, like, and I know this kind of crazy because like, it's like, okay, you're putting it into now a studio. So that literally impacts the way that it translates, like, or at least the original one was, and like it impacts the way the original memory looked like for me. But supposedly these like restagings are so that like, again, I can't, it's not something I can forget. Or at least like even if I do, I've already remade it and I can be able to see that and be like, oh yeah, that is like a specific ritual that we used to do or a specific practice that we were like doing or like, yeah, going out to the well in order to get this water was like something of ours. And being able to, I've like come to, my whole practice has now almost literally been reiterating the same things and talking about them over and over again, and like even having conversations and explaining said memories and things along those lines, or writing them down, and to the point where like, not that it becomes script or anything, but I'm like, it's almost like a hammer and a nail. I'm like building this thing, and not the way for every time I talk about it, the like less I forget it, or the more it's more present, the more I feel it. And I don't know if that.
Thank you.
Do we have any last comments or questions?
I have a question. That was a really beautiful talk, Matilda. Thank you so much for sharing that insight into your practice. And I was just wondering, like, coming back to that word of unassimilate, and thinking about how you are interacting with what it means to be Congolese or a part of the Congolese diaspora. I'm thinking like when you are ruminating on what that means, like, are you mainly interacting with evidence of that in your memories, or are there other sources that you go to, like archives, media, specific relationships in your life, or do you find yourself mainly just relying on the memory?
This is hilarious because you're spot on. That's awesome. What's it called? Because there was a time where it was literally I wrote something that was like, oh, memory is like my verification that I existed there, or something along those lines. But the whole part of like the rituals of an assimilating is like literally creating these small little aspects that not validify, yeah, almost like reinstate said identity. So like things like trying to like go on a difficult phone call with my mom, and difficult not in the sense of like conversation, difficult in the sense of like I sometimes won't be able to like know what word I'm trying to say, and I'd have to like take a second and tell her one moment, like, and then go into a translator and typing that in, and then being able to. I've recently in Congo we used to watch telenovelas that were like dubbed in French, and so I've recently been able to find those telenovelas and been rewatching them. So like almost these practices in which I do remember, like I do think I'm over reliant on memory for sure, because that's kind of like the way in which I'm like, okay, maybe, or at least not even, it does, yeah, it does validify my like Congolese-ness, but not necessarily, just in the sense of like I feel closer to Congo because I can remember it, and I can remember the feelings or the streets or the names and the things along those lines. Um, but I've just like, yeah, I've been doing small little things for myself, and like between myself and my family maybe, in which I can try to, whether that is watching the little telenovela or like listening to French songs that I remember from Congo, or like, but mind you, it's gonna be the same five songs, and it's kind of almost sad, low-key, but I'm like, maybe I talk to my family and they give me more, more songs, recent songs that can catch me up to what's happening now. There was even a conversation with my mom in which I was asking her about this mortar and pestle, which I didn't know was called a mortar and pestle. Okay. But it's this wooden thing. It was gigantic, and we'd pound cassava leaves with it. And I was like, oh, mom, like, what's that thing called? I'm trying to like find it, and I'm trying to order it or something along those lines. She's like, oh, we just use like what do you call it? That thing that just crap. It's the thing that literally just breaks down. Like if you put it into, uh, what do you make a shake with?
A
A
blender?
food processor? A blender?
Blender. A blender. She said, "Oh, we just use a blender. We don't actually pound the cassava leaves anymore." I was like, "Oh, that's crazy." And so this idea of like my memory can only take me so far, because the Congo I left behind is not the Congo that exists now, you know? And so what does it mean? Or at least like the questions that I am like trying to configure with are like, what does it mean to like go back right now, and what does that look like for me? And would it be a time that I would fit in with almost? Um, and like, would it have changed too much that I'd almost seek refuge back in America? If that makes sense. But yeah, thank you for your question.
Yeah, thank you so much for that response. And like for what it's worth, I think that like as someone who also makes a lot of work thinking about home and like in relation to identity and culture, I feel like seeing the ways that you have interacted with that subject matter for your own lineage is really inspiring and moving and powerful. And I think that when it comes to work that is about also being a part of diaspora, something that I try and remind myself of is that it's not just about having cultural authority, but cultural authenticity. And so, like, the ways in which that you are really authentic in your work stands out and has voice. So, thank you.
Your work is so beautiful and impactful and resonant. Especially I think with like two culture kids, like where there is, and also like one thing I really connected with in your work was the idea of connecting to this land through the mother. And to that your experiences are therefore bridged by this maternal relationship, but how much of that is also really confusing and uncertain because it is not your vision, technically, it is your mother's. And it's this really weird, dissonant relationship. But I think in what you were talking about of understanding and honoring the fact that we also have an authentic relationship with these places, and the world was not built to serve the people that we are, not just mixed kids, but culturally abundant children, and just know like your work is just so impactful and it makes me want to cry in the best way possible. So
Thank you.
I hope you get all that money because I need to see more of
Me too.
it.
Thank you, Ashe. Shoot. Thank you, guys.
I
Thank
hope
you
we're
so
not
much.
completely out of time because I do. Are we?
Well, we just so we can have a few minutes to talk about your thing, but go ahead. Go ahead.
I would love to hear, and this doesn't need to be now, we can table this conversation for later if necessary to also give you time to like, I just want to know about your material choices. Just, for me, my relationship with photography tends to be kind of just like point and shoot, get documentation of my sculpture over with. But your relationship is so physical. Just seeing those water bag pieces is really, I used to do photo transfers, and that was like my first introduction where I was like, oh, I get why people take pictures now. It's like I get it. So it's just really awesome seeing those kinds of processes come to life, and even just when it's not on a material. I mean, there's so much physicality within, obviously having a body, documenting that is it's not an inherently political thing, but it still documents and can represent like the politic that is placed on you. And I don't know what a great snapshot of that. But yeah, thank you for sharing.
I appreciate that so much. Since we're running out of time, I'm gonna make sure I write that shit down. Thank you.
Let's give another round of applause for Matilda. Wonderful job. Good job.
Thank you all. Thank you guys.